She thought it would just be an ordinary birthday dinner with her fiancé, until a stranger approached, embraced her like someone reuniting with a great love, and whispered words that left her in shock. In front of him, she couldn't explain. She just cried. Now everything that had happened didn't seem to be true. Hello, my friends. I am Linda, and this is the Linda's Stories channel. I hope you enjoy this story. The old corner bistro was not sophisticated. The wooden tables covered with yellow checkered tablecloths had witnessed decades of family meals. The walls, adorned with old photos and a perpetually outdated calendar, told stories that Abigail knew by heart. The hydraulic tile floor, with patterns worn by time, bore the marks of her first steps when, as a little girl, she would run between the tables while her parents dined. Abigail adjusted the dress she had chosen for her 30th birthday. It was a simple but elegant design, just like the restaurant. She watched Thomas, her fiancé, carefully examining the menu, probably looking for something that stood out among the homemade dishes. "The pumpkin ravioli is amazing," Abigail suggested. "My father always ordered that dish for us to share." Thomas smiled. "Then it will be ravioli," he replied, closing the menu. Abigail noticed Thomas's slight accent, a charm that remained even after 15 years of living in the city. They met in college. He was an architect, methodical and organized, the opposite of Abigail, a literature teacher whose life was a delightful mess of books and ideas. The restaurant was particularly crowded that Thursday night, which was unusual. Tony, now in his 70s, still ran the dining room with his usual energy, stopping at each table for a quick chat. "My father used to bring me here every Sunday after church," Abigail remarked, running her fingers along the rim of her water glass. "We would always sit at that table in the corner. It was our ritual." Thomas took her hand across the table. "You miss him?" It wasn't a question, and Abigail appreciated that. Her father, Henry, was still alive, but the disease had stolen his essence nearly 5 years ago. Dementia had progressed rapidly, transforming a brilliant man, a university professor of history, into someone who lived lost among fragments of disconnected memories. "Sometimes I miss him so intensely that it physically hurts," Abigail confessed. "It's as if he embarked on a long journey, leaving only his body behind." Thomas gently shook his hand. He had never known Henry in his lucid days, only the confused man who now lived under the care of Margaret, Abigail's mother. "He called me Maria yesterday," she continued, referring to her deceased grandmother. "When I showed him photos of our trip, he asked if I had taken the passport." Tony's arrival interrupted the conversation. The restaurant owner, with his impeccably white apron and grey hair carefully combed to the side, smiled broadly upon seeing Abigail. "Hello, Abigail! What a joy to have you here on your birthday," he exclaimed. "Your father always brought you here on your birthdays. Such a good time, I miss it." Abigail smiled at the memory. "How is he?" Tony asked, lowering his voice. "Some days are better than others," replied Abigail. "Mum has been amazing taking care of him." Tony nodded empathetically. "Margaret is a warrior. God bless that woman." After Tony walked away, Thomas and Abigail talked about work, about the renovation of the apartment they had bought together, about plans for the weekend. It was a light conversation, sprinkled with smiles and knowing glances. When the ravioli arrived, Abigail closed her eyes as she smelled the familiar aroma. She could almost hear her father's voice explaining the history of pasta, one of the many impromptu lessons he gave during meals. "Dad used to say that eating well is an act of civilization," she commented, serving herself a ravioli. "He turned every meal into a small lesson about history or culture." Thomas listened attentively. Although he had never truly met Henry, he felt he knew him through Abigail's stories. That's when she felt a light touch on her shoulder. She turned, expecting to see Tony with yet another story from the past. But standing there beside her desk was her father. Henry was looking at her with an intensity she hadn't seen in years. His eyes, usually vacant or confused, now sparkled with recognition. For a moment, Abigail saw in them the passionate teacher he had once been, the man who had taught her to love books, history, and knowledge. Before she could say anything, Henry leaned in and hugged her. "I'm so glad I found you," he said, with surprising clarity in his voice. "I've missed you so much, my dear." Abigail felt the world stop, but as she looked back, she realized that none of this was happening by chance. Her mother was right there, a few steps behind, and only then did she understand. That arrival was not improvised. It was part of a silent surprise. Thomas and Margaret had arranged everything days before, believing that despite the challenges, her father's presence could illuminate her birthday in a way no gift ever could. Margaret knew that Henry rarely left the house anymore, but that day he had woken up calmer, more willing, and she decided to seize the rare opportunity. Thomas, on the other hand, remembered how much that restaurant was a part of Mariana's childhood, and imagined that bringing her parents there, in that setting that held so many memories, would be a discreet and affectionate way to celebrate the date. But they did not expect that this would happen. "Daughter, my God, look how you've grown," Henry continued, stepping back to look at her. It was as if a dam had burst inside Abigail. The tears started to fall silently as she held her father's hands. "Daddy?" she whispered, almost afraid that her voice might break the enchantment of that moment. "Of course," he replied, as if it were obvious. "Who else would it be?" Henry smiled, that smile that had disappeared so long ago, the smile that lit up his eyes and created little wrinkles around them. "And who is this young man?" he asked, looking at Thomas. "This is Thomas, my fiancé," Abigail introduced, while Thomas extended his hand. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, sir," said Thomas, his voice betraying his emotion. "Take good care of her," Henry replied, shaking Thomas's hand firmly. "She has always been strong on the outside, but she has a heart that feels everything deeply." Margaret approached with her hands pressed against her chest, as if trying to contain her own emotion. She knew better than anyone that these moments were rare and precious, small windows of clarity that opened and closed without warning. "We're renovating an apartment, Dad," Abigail said, speaking quickly, as if she wanted to make the most of every second. "It has a large balcony, just like you always said a house should have." "To see the sunset," Henry completed. "One should never live in a place where you can't see the sunset." It was one of the phrases he had repeated since Abigail was little. Hearing those words again, in his strong and clear voice, was like receiving back a treasure she believed lost forever. "I never stopped loving you." "Never," Henry said suddenly, holding Abigail's hands between his own. "Even when the words don't come, even when everything seems confusing, you are always here." He pointed to his own chest. Abigail felt as if something inside her, something that had been broken for so long, was beginning to heal. Not completely. Her father's illness was still a painful reality, but enough for her to breathe without that constant feeling of loss. There were those who said that certain memories never died. They only fell asleep. The deepest, most stubborn ones were kept where the disease couldn't reach. Sometimes, even when everything seemed faded, a familiar smell, the sound of dishes, the yellowish light of an old restaurant was enough for some silent door inside him to open. Perhaps that's why, for an instant, he found his way back to her. But then, as suddenly as it had arrived, the lucidity was gone. Henry's eyes lost focus. His expression changed, the smile disappeared, replaced by a look of confusion. "Margaret?" he called, looking around. "Where are we? Is it time to go home?" Margaret quickly approached, placing her hand on his shoulder. "We are at the old corner bistro, dear. We came for dinner, remember?" Henry frowned as he lost the brief lucidity, letting slip away in seconds that rare sparkle that had illuminated his eyes moments before. The contrast was painful, but Abigail did not despair. There was a new serenity within her, as if she knew that this, even so brief, was already a gift. Margaret, noticing the return of confusion in her husband, just touched her daughter's arm with a gesture of silent apology. Abigail responded with a calm look. Everything was fine. The rest of the night passed surprisingly light. Even without fully understanding where he was, Henry remained calm. Margaret guided him with gentle gestures, and together they all managed to share a simple yet meaningful dinner. There was emotion in every detail. In the way Margaret arranged the napkin over her husband's lap, in the way Abigail observed him, trying to engrave each small moment in her memory, and in the attentive care of Thomas, who seemed to understand the weight and delicacy of that night. When the dinner ended and each went their separate ways, Abigail felt that she didn't want that moment to dissolve like so many others. Already in the car, with the door newly closed and the silence filling the space between her and Thomas, the doubt finally reached her. She turned still with tearful eyes, seeking in him a confirmation that could support her heart. "Was it real, wasn't it?" she asked, almost fearful that it was all just an illusion created by her desperate desire to have her father back. Thomas took her hands. "It was real," he confirmed. "As real as the two of us here." Abigail leaned against the car window to look at the dark sky, dotted with the first stars of the night. The gentle breeze touched her face and she took a deep breath, as if trying to capture the entire moment for herself. Gradually, a soft smile formed. It was not of euphoria, but of recognition, of something intimate, silent, and deep. That night reminded her that despite everything the illness had taken, something remained intact. The memory might fade, gestures might falter, words might be lost. But love, mysteriously, still found ways to pierce through the fog surrounding her father. And that small spark, a touch on the shoulder, a moment of lucidity, a look that recognized her, was enough to illuminate everything. It was proof that some bonds do not break, even when the whole world seems to be falling apart. On that birthday, Abigail did not receive a gift wrapped in paper. She received something rarer, the certainty that, even when everything seems distant or unrecognizable, love still finds a way to reach us. And sometimes, that's enough to rekindle everything that was extinguished inside. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.